Good morning, Rossmoor. I am Tom Cashon. I'm the Public Safety Manager for the Golden Rain Foundation, and I want to thank everyone for being here for Rossmoor's third installment of a series of wildfire safety presentations that we've been doing during the wildfire season. A big thank you to PG&E and Confire for their presentations that they did the last two times. In California, we've seen devastating fires over the past years. Experts are relating it to many things, including California's long-term drought, global warming, poor forestry management, and the need for safer practices. This is why GRF has brought you this series of wildfire safety presentations throughout this fire season. This year's fire season is expected to be very bad, and we're trying to prepare for that. For this month's presentation, I reached out to San Jose State University professor, Dr. Kate Wilkin, to speak about fire ecology. So this time we're going to go into some fire science, which should be very interesting. I also reached out to our county's Office of Emergency Services to speak about their role and responsibilities in disasters. Thus, today you get two presentations instead of just one. You'll find these programs to be extremely valuable in helping you and our community better prepare for a wildfire situation. As always, we have a panel of experts to help answer questions that fall outside the presenter's roles and responsibilities. But before I continue, I want to give Golden Rain Foundation CEO, Tim O'Keefe, a chance to speak to us all. Tim?
Thanks, Tom, and welcome everybody. I can see here that we have more than 100 people on the call, so that's a great turnout today. I want to thank Dr. Wilkin from San Jose State University for participating, and Tom Cashon from GRF for organizing this, the Contra Costa Fire Protection District, the county's Office of Emergency Services, City of Walnut Creek PD, and Rossmoor EPO for participating here today. You know, the extraordinary fires that we've had in California over the last few years have elevated everybody's concern about the possibility of fire in and around Rossmoor. And Golden Rain and the Rossmoor Mutuals are committed to the safety, preparedness, and spend tens of thousands of dollars every year mitigating the risk to the community and encouraging residents to do all that they can to be prepared. The wildfires up and down the state in recent years have required homeowners, businesses, municipalities, and fire departments to more carefully evaluate the fire risk in communities. In 2018 and 2019, we had 3 wildfires in Rossmoor that encroached into our community that were caused by wild animals interacting with PG&E equipment. Last month, there was a wildfire on Rockledge. The cause was undetermined, but it was underneath PG&E distribution lines. So we know that we're not immune to danger, and that we had PG&E here just recently in April to discuss their vegetation management and wildfire safety programs. I also want to point out and remind everyone that just a little over a year ago, following a year-long effort, Golden Rain updated its emergency operations plan to specifically address wildfire, and we worked closely with the Fire Protection District, the city, the county, EPO, CERT, and the Red Cross to be better prepared in the event that evacuations were required in Rossmoor. We've learned through all of these exercises that wildfire management and evacuation planning are 2 of the 3 very important elements. The third is individual preparation. So I want to take this opportunity to again remind everyone that Rossmoor's Emergency Preparedness Organization has outstanding resources on their website to assist Rossmoor residents in their planning. And I know Fran Gibson, who's on this call, will discuss this later today, but I want to put up that website once again. It's rossmoorepo.org. So anybody can access that site and find all kinds of resources there on how to be prepared. We're pleased that the Fire Protection District, the county, and the city have agreed to conduct today's event to demonstrate their ongoing commitment to keeping the Rossmoor community safe. So with that, let's listen and learn how fire moves and how our community is being prepared, and how the city and the Fire Protection District are keeping Rossmoor safe.
All right, great. Thank you, Tim. I want everybody to know, we're not alone here at the Golden Rain Foundation. We work with many different agencies and organizations to make everybody safer. I want you to know, like Tim says, we work very closely with EPO. We also work with Rossmoor's, with City of Walnut Creek's Rossmoor's CERT team, the ham radio and CB groups, Securitas, the City of Walnut Creek, the Walnut Creek Police Department, Contra Costa County Fire Protection District, Contra Costa Office of Emergency Services, which you'll hear about today. We also work with Lafayette Police Department, PG&E, East Bay Municipal Water District, Contra Costa County Animal Services, who's on our panel today, as well as Red Cross and many others, in order to make sure that we are better prepared and that we are able to respond effectively in case there is ever a disaster. And our whole goal is to make Rossmoor even safer. And also, in an effort to make Rossmoor even safer, I would like to share a sneak peek with everybody today. This will be delivered, I'm going to show you in a minute, in the Rossmoor News next week. And really thanks to the help from the City of Walnut Creek, the Walnut Creek Police Department, the Contra Costa Fire Protection District, Officer of Emergency Services, as well as our very own EPO. We created the Wildfire Safety Card. So this is what will be coming out in the Rossmoor News in a week. I know it's in paper format right now, but it's actually going to be a card. And it'll be two-sided, 8.5 by 14 card. And on the first side, it talks about Ready, Set, Go, which is a program that most fire departments use in order to better prepare communities for fire disasters and wildfire safety. It has a bunch of emergency numbers as well on here. And then on the back side, you will see a map of our community. And this ties into what CEO Tim O'Keefe talked about on our 2020 emergency operation plan. We created these zones, and now they've been adopted by the city and Confire, as well as Office of Emergency Services for their new software called Zone Haven. And it talks about, what zone you're in, knowing your zone, and you'll be able to see all of that next week and some more information as well. So I don't want to promise. I'm hoping it will be here next week. But if not, it will be in the following week. And it's going to be delivered through the Rossmoor News as an insert in your news. There'll also be an article in the Rossmoor News talking about it. So more to come on that front. So I'm excited we were able to complete that and bring that to our community. Now I would like to introduce our expert panel and then hand over the presentation to Dr. Wilkin. Today, as Tim O'Keefe already talked about, we have Chris Bachman, Marshal from the Contra Costa County Fire Protection District. We have from the City of Walnut Creek, Deputy City Manager Carla Hansen. From the Walnut Creek Police Department, we have Lieutenant Tony Mangini. From the Contra Costa County Office of the Sheriff, Office of Emergency Services, Manager Rick Kovar, and Community Warning System Manager Heather Tiernan. From the Golden Rain Foundation, we have obviously CEO Tim O'Keefe, Landscape Manager Rebecca Pallone, and myself. And lastly, we have Rossmoor's very own Rockstar Emergency Preparedness Organization President, Fran Gibson. They're all here to answer any questions that may fall into their respective roles at the end of the presentations. Speaking of questions, after Dr. Wilkins and the Office of Emergency Services presentations, we will have time for questions and answers. For time's sake, we will not be doing any in-person questions. You'll have to submit your questions through the Q&A button. We all hope at the end of this presentation, you will all be more aware and better educated, and that Rossmoor will be even safer. So shall we get started? First, I want to introduce our first presenter. Dr. Kate Wilkin is a professor of fire ecology in the biology department at San Jose State University and a member of the Wildfire Interdisciplinary Research Center. She has nearly 20 years of experience in natural resource management, outreach, and research. Dr. Wilkin was recently a forestry and fire science advisor with the University of California Agricultural and Natural Resources, and their acronym is UCANR. Prior to UCANR, she was a postdoctoral scholar and PhD student at University of California, Berkeley, go Bears, a biology master's student at California Polytechnic State University, and has environmental science and biology degrees from the College of William and Mary, go Griffins. She focuses on how we can live sustainability in fire-prone ecosystems like California and fire management from the wilderness to the wildland-urban interface. Recently, her research and outreach focused on wildfire recovery of communities and natural lands, prescribed fire on private lands, and wildfire mitigation, including fire-resistant homes, defensible space, and fuel treatments. Dr. Wilkin and her work have been featured in Science Magazine, NPR's Science Friday, Outside Magazine, and Sunset Magazine. So we're very lucky to have her here. Dr. Wilkin, take it away.
Thank you so much, Tom. It's great to see everybody this morning. And so, we obviously have a tremendous wildfire problem here in California. And the last few years have been catastrophic and traumatizing for everyone living in California, especially here in Northern California. And, I wish this was a simple problem to solve and it was easy to fix. But like many of our wicked societal problems, the causes and the solutions are complex. And so today I want to talk a little bit about how we ended up here, and then also talk about one of my research paths looking at the use of prescribed fire to help solve this problem, to help solve one of the many wildfire problems, I should say. And so just to start off with, I'm curious, why does everyone here today think we have such a wildfire problem? If you could write it in the chat window, I'd really appreciate it. Climate change, PG&E, too many trees, or how we manage our lands, drought, climate change, people living in the wildland-urban interface, more drought. Obviously, this is a drought year. And so these are all parts of the puzzle about why we have such a fire problem here in California. And I'm going to talk a little bit more detail about some of these points that you all have brought up today. And so why do we have such a wildfire problem here in California? And so when I look at the problem, I think about three main sources of issues. I see land management, so how we manage our natural areas and our fuel breaks and our evacuation route clearances. I think about climate change and if we can mitigate climate change or if we can adapt to it. And then I also think about land use planning and codes. And so, the site placement of a structure, fire resistant structures and yards, neighborhood layouts, community layouts, evacuations, and then overall collaborations. Obviously, I have 20 minutes with you all today. So I am really going to be focusing on land management and climate change. So with climate change, when I think about fire and climate change, I do recognize that we see these strong trends. And so when we think about climate change in California, I often think about, how many acres are burning in a state. Is that a good indicator of climate change and fire relationships? And so here we're looking at the average annual acres burned in California by decade. And so on the y-axis, we have acres going from 0 to 1 million. And on the x-axis, we have our decades. So 1940, I think where some of you all may have been born in the 40s. Going up through your lives, you can see that we have seen this increase in the acres in California that are burning. And when we start to think about when the effects of climate change have really been felt, we often think about those starting in the 80s and 90s. And we do see this rather dramatic increase in the amount of acres burning in California that correlates really well to a changing climate. And one of my colleagues, Tony Westerling from UC Merced, has done intensive research on this, and that he has been able to demonstrate clearly that we're having warmer and earlier springs that are strongly related to an increase in Western US forest fires. And so, what's happening this week and last week, we can think about Shasta County and the fires that they've been having in the greater Shasta area, the lava fire and a few others that you've probably seen in the news. And I saw that one of their local fire chiefs said that the fuel moisture, the amount of moisture in those plants that are burning today, they have the fuel moisture of what we would expect to see a plant in late August because we've had such a dry year. So what we're seeing here is that idea of an earlier spring allowing us to have a longer fire season and more opportunities for extreme fire. But ultimately, this is really only part of the truth. So climate change is a factor when we think about fire in California. But some of my other research colleagues have been, asking questions about, especially with land management, can land management mitigate the effects of climate change? So do you and I and our policymakers here in California have agency to change what's happening here in California. And so here is another graph looking much deeper in time. And so this is looking at how many acres burned in California throughout our known history in fire. And so this is still averaged annual acres burned in California, but on the y-axis, instead of having thousands of acres, we have millions of acres. And so in the early 1800s, there's some estimates about how many acres used to burn in our state every year. And the estimates are somewhere between 4 and 12 million. And what's interesting to me about this particular graph here is that, we had a lot of fire before Europeans came to California, when we had lightning strike fires and when we had Native Americans prescribing fire on their lands. Obviously, there was a dramatic decline in fire after the gold rush. And then we see more recently that we are seeing an increase in fire. And so here in 2020, it was about 4 million, right? Or more. And so ultimately what we see here is that we have a lot of fire and increasing fire in California, in part because of climate change, but also in part because we're managing our lands differently, because we've been suppressing fire. And so here is a graph that I want to share with you all. And so this is a complex graph. So first, just focus on my face and what I'm saying. And so some of my colleagues, Alan Taylor, Valerie Truitt, Carl Skinner, and Scott Stevens, examined California's forest fire history. So this is primarily looking at California's forests. And they looked at a record of California's forests for the past 415 years in the state. They looked at fire scars that were on the trees. And so when you and I take something out of the oven and get a little burn on our hand, you know how we sometimes get a little scar? Well, trees are the same way. And we can look at those scars in relationship to their tree rings to understand how fires occur and when they occur. And so using this study, they were able to demonstrate that there are large shifts in the fire record that correspond with social ecological change happening here in California, and not climate change in our forests historically. And these social ecological changes amplified or buffered fire's response to climate. So in California's forests, we actually have quite a lot of agency. And so if you all can stay with me here, I recognize this as a complex graph. So let's start with a simple axis. So here on the y-axis, we have years going from 1600 to 2000. And I've put in some historical things that you all might know about, like Native California burning, the Hispanic period, the gold rush, and then our modern era of fire suppression. And what we see here, when we look at this red line, what we see here is we're looking at how fire relates to climate change. We also see how many people are living in California. And so here we have this this triangle, a brown triangle, and this is showing the population of Native Americans that lived in the state. And what we see here is this dashed line is the depopulation and the murders of our Native populations, to the point where we see that those populations completely decimated. And then we start to see these darker brown dots as the increase in California's population into the modern period with Euro-Americans. And looking at this graph, what we see is that the correlation of climate and fire activity is not correlated strongly during this Native American time period. Even they've had some dramatic changes with the Little Ice Age, and some rather dramatic changes where you might expect to see fire activity change. You don't actually see that change in California's forests, likely because people were burning. People were prescribing fire. And then we see a dramatic increase in fire activity during the Hispanic and Gold Rush period. We see a decline in fire activity at the beginning of fire suppression. And then now in this modern time period, the relationship between forest fires and climate change becomes loose again. Because one of the thoughts is that we have so much fuel on our landscape, it doesn't matter how dry the year is. We have so much fuel that we are ripe for fire. And so, what this story tells me that they were able to show through these fire SCAR history studies is that, we have a lot of agency when we think about California's forests. Which brings me to this idea of land management. And so, historically, Native Californians prescribed fire, and they allowed lightning strike fires to burn unimpeded. Today, that might not seem like an ideal scenario because we have so many people who live here in California. And I just like to say that I'm one of the biggest advocates for prescribed fire that you might meet, mainly because I like flowers and butterflies and bees in our California's forests, the microflora and the microfauna. But that's not always the right choice. So, there's other things that we can do like targeted grazing, timber harvest, mastication, targeted browsing, and something called thin from below. And so these are all things that we can use to mimic fire or even to prepare our lands for fire. And ultimately, fire is this incredible ecological importance in our forests and also in all of our lands here in California. So fire consumes vegetation and it recycles nutrients. Some people kind of compare this to an herbivore, but a goat or a sheep, they do this very differently, and they prefer the lush willow leaves to the dry grass, right? Fire also selects for plants and animals that have specific fire adaptations. It can alter the community composition and how they assemble, so it changes what species are present and how they interact. So, for example, I've done some work in California's Sierra Nevada forest looking at understory flowers and pollinators and how they're not only do those species compositions change within each of those groups, but the interactions between them even change when you allow fires to burn in kind of a historical way. And then fires also can alter and create biomes. So, the C4 grasslands are thought to have been originated with fire. So fire is this incredibly important thing. And so one of my research projects is looking at how can we increase fire here in California. And so historically and in the modern era, I would say that very little prescribed fire has been done on public lands, let alone private lands, even though many of our forests are adapted to fire. And I think both our public agencies and our private landowners play a key role in moving forward with prescribed fire. And so this is a graph looking at how much prescribed fire has occurred in California in the modern period. So here on the y-axis, we have acres, and on the x-axis, we have time. And so before the National Fire Suppression Policy occurred in 1910 after the Big Burn, prescribed fire was actually very common in California. And it actually was common again after that policy, in part because there was a lot of burning on rangelands. A lot of the people who owned cattle ranches here in California had actually learned from the native Californians about how to burn the lands to help maintain them. There's also some U.S. Forest Service research that in California that said that light burning was impractical and economically ineffective. And so the State Board of Forestry followed their advice and adapted a no burn policy. Then we saw in the 40s that there was another statewide policy shift that CAL FIRE requires permits to burn. And part of this is because there's more people moving into California and they're concerned about people burning in the open range. We have a UC Berkeley professor, Harold the Torch Biswell, who came from the Southeast where prescribed fire was very common. And he tried to reintroduce fire here to California. So here's a picture of him at Calavera State Park. And you can see that he's just wearing his street clothes. And this is the type of light burning that many of us think would be appropriate to have in our California forests regularly, once we can restore the structure where we can do it safely. Admittedly, he had a very thick skin. He went to Yosemite to talk about his ideas and his research. And the rangers threw spitballs at him and produce, and then finally just left. They didn't want to listen to him because these ideas were seen as so far-fetched and so unnatural and bad for our native systems. During Harold's time, he worked really closely with a lot of the people who owned cattle land, potentially similar to some of the lands around Rossmoor. And in the 1950s was the time period that we had peak burning of these of this range, both from the cattle ranchers themselves, but also through California Division of Forestry. They often lit a lot of these fires with the cattle people. Then in the 1980s and in modern time periods, Cal Fire's vegetation management program started to burn more acres. But ultimately, we see that in the early 2000s, Cal Fire's vegetation management plan really changed, and they stopped burning, 25,000 acres a year, which is not very much to begin with, and we're burning closer to, 2, 3, 4, 10,000 acres a year. And many people were upset about this. And so in the early 2000s, Klamath residents started burning as part of a 501c3. They started to burn their forests. They started to burn their backyards. They started to burn around the play areas because they wanted to create a ring of black around their community to protect them from forest fires, but also to help promote natural diversity and cultural diversity in that region. Through the 2000s, through the early 2000s into 2010, there was still very low amounts of prescribed fire, but there was a lot of agreement, especially after the Camp Fire and what happened to Paradise, that more prescribed fire was needed. There was lots of agreement. Everyone said we need agencies and scientists and the public, people who worked in disasters, Governor Jerry Brown, the Cal Fire chief at the time, Chief Pemlott, all the researchers, and ultimately people wanted prescribed fire, but it was just kind of difficult for people to implement. And then in 2017, one of my colleagues at UC, Lenya Quinn-Davidson, helped found a prescribed burn association here in California. That's where private landowners get together and help one another burn. And there was so much interest in Lenya's counties where she worked, in Mendocino County and Humboldt County. And there was a lot of interest in the counties where I worked, in Butte, Yuba, and Nevada counties. That now today, there are more than 25 prescribed burn associations here in California because people want to use fire on their private lands. And as part of this, I helped host workshops to help people understand how they can use prescribed fire on private lands. Both, if you have a family forest, if you are a nonprofit, or if you are part of a community like Rossmoor, where you may have some publicly held lands. In these workshops, we talked about a lot of different things about permitting and Cal Fire, different ways you can achieve your goals, and just what is a prescribed fire. We worked with a lot of really, really great collaborators, volunteer fire departments, Cal Fire, local municipalities, our local air quality districts, local resource conservation districts, the National Resource Conservation Service. Everyone who's involved in fire and lands management were involved in these workshops. It was a really great group of people to work with. And we also had we've had over 700 participants come to these workshops who want to use prescribed fire. And so we asked them a lot of questions. What is your gender, how old you are, how many acres do you manage, why do you want to use prescribed fire? And I want to share some of those results with you all today. And so when we're thinking about who's attending the workshop, on average, the people are older. They're about 56 years old on average. And there's slightly more men than women attending our workshops. About 60% of the workshop is men, and about 40% of the workshop is women. We saw that we had a lot of people who were landowners, homeowners. We had a lot of people who were in fire safe councils or fire-wise communities, and these other groups. There were not as many people who attended these workshops, especially in the early days, with the data that I'm presenting you all from communities, although that number has been increasing. And so for these workshops, they were a 2-day workshop. The first day was looking at the books, trying to understand fire. And the second day was actually having participants help us with prescribed fire so that they could become more comfortable and use these skills as part of a prescribed burn association, or just communicate to their communities how important prescribed fire is. So here you can see we have a lot of different types of people, and many, and the ages, especially here on this Blodgett fire. I don't know if you all can see or not, but I think we have someone who's like maybe 86 or 87 who remembers burning with his family, but then gets to burn again here with our workshop. These people often had grasslands, shrublands, woodlands, and forests. And you can see that people often had more than one type of vegetation on their properties. When we asked them, how do you all want to burn your lands? Some of the opportunities that they didn't know about before the workshop might be working with an agency like CAL FIRE or their local fire district, a contractor, burning with their friends and family, a prescribed burn association, and then also a large landscape collaborative working with all of these groups, tribes, and more. And so looking at these different pathways, many people who own private lands were really interested in these prescribed burn associations. And so the Humboldt Prescribed Burn Association has residents, volunteer fire departments, contractors, CAL FIRE, landowners, and this says that they're burning 500 acres a year. And I should update this. This past year, they burned 3,000 acres. And this is really popular because you are in charge, it's low cost, there's less environmental compliance, you can pool labor and skills, but some of the cons might be liability or permitting, and that someone needs to kind of coordinate. So sometimes having a coordinator is really nice. I mean, if you're interested in that, and if you're interested in a local prescribed burn association, our closest one is the Central Coast Prescribed Burn Association in Santa Cruz, Monterey, and San Benito counties. And they are, they have a large grant from CAL FIRE to do some training. Something that I think is a path forward for California is this idea of agency burning near, in, and around our communities. And so here we have an example from North Lake Tahoe, the Forest Service, and the Tahoe Collaborative, where they're burning over 1,000 acres a year in the Tahoe Basin. And this was really important to them after the 2007 Angora fire, where over 200 homes were lost. And when I say that they're burning in and around homes, here is a picture of a community. It kind of looks like Rossmoor. You have this circular community here with some common lands in the center. But when you look at this little excerpt here, the golden lines are where the prescribed fires are occurring in different time periods. But when you look at this little excerpt here, this pullout, you can see that there's a house here less than 25 feet away from the prescribed fire line. And so this is something that I think is part of our path forward here in California. And this idea that agencies are burning closer and closer to people's homes to protect them, not to defend them from a wildfire, but to protect them from a wildfire. We also have this idea of larger landscape collaboratives. And so here, the Trinity Integrated Fire Management Partnership, they have goals of burning about 30,000 acres. And right now they've just burned a little over 1,000 acres. And this again is a large collaborative cross-boundary multi-partner effort to reduce fire hazards. And so do you all have any questions here about prescribed fire or this idea of starting a new prescribed fire culture in California? Or rekindling the prescribed fire culture in California?
I have a question. I was wondering if people, I'm sure people have studied the occurrence of fires before versus after prescribed fire management, and how long do the benefits of the prescribed fires last?
For prescribed fire, how long do the fuels reduction benefits of that last? So, for example, in the Sierra Nevada forests, if you have a prescribed fire, you would expect to actually maybe not see a wildfire enter that for up to 10 years. So it wouldn't, because there's so much less fuel, there wouldn't be enough fuel to burn. And then after that, you'd still see a reduction in fire severity, or that's jargon for how many trees die in a fire, for another 5 or 10 years after a prescribed fire. That's obviously different for, say, like a grassland. Grass fuels grow fast. And so in and around Rossmoor, a grass fire, if you all were to burn a grassland, that fuel reduction might last for a year or two, just because those communities recover so quickly. A shrubland, you might see a recovery of those fuels by maybe a full recovery of those fuels and fuel loads by maybe 12 years.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Wilkin. I appreciate it. That was very interesting. So now I wanted to introduce our second presentation today. and that is from the Office of Emergency Services. And so that everybody knows, Office of Emergency Services falls under our county sheriff's office. I'm sure they're going to share that with you as well. So I'd like to introduce Rick Kovar, Manager Rick Kovar, and CWS Manager Heather Tiernan. Go ahead, Rick and Heather.
Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to come speak. Quick introductions. My name is Rick Kovar. I'm the Emergency Services Manager for the Office of Emergency Services here in Contra Costa County. And then I'll let Heather speak or introduce herself. And then the third person I want to introduce, who's may or may not be on this call, is Julie Beach, who's Emergency Planning Coordinator, who is assigned to Central County, which includes Walnut Creek. So she's going to be the main point of contact from our office for happenings going on in Walnut Creek. So want to make sure that we get her name out there, and both City of Walnut Creek and Golden Rain knows who she is. So for going forward. So we got two pieces we'll talk about. I'm going to speak to what the Office of Emergency Services does, and then I'll hand it over to Heather to speak about the community warning system. And she's got, I think, some very important things specifically for the community of Rossmoor as far as getting ready and prepared. So our role in any type of event, whether it be a disaster, a local emergency, or preparing for that, is all encompassing. We develop and maintain emergency plans and annexes for a variety of situations. The main thing that we try and do is get ready for those potential emergencies. And so we do a lot of coordination, a lot of agency coordination, which we'll speak about as well. This type of presentation and this able to work with the community of Rossmoor is part of that overall scope of getting to know our collaboration and collaborators. So in time of emergency, we know who to work with to make quick decisions and try and mitigate the disaster. One of the things that we do is we have an emergency operations center, which is a sort of a central point, which we'll talk about, that we can coordinate emergency response throughout the county. We do a lot of coordination of emergency response. So one of the themes of emergency management is all disasters are local. So if an event happens in Walnut Creek and or specifically in Rossmoor, the local first responders are going to respond to that. So Contra Costa Fire, Walnut Creek Police are going to be the first on scene to manage that. If an event grows and gets to a point where it's outside of their local resources, then they will come to the county and we'll work with getting more mutual aid resources in there through automatic aid, mutual aid, and state agreements. So we don't take over an incident. We don't manage local incidences. We leave that to what's called the incident commander, and we support their operations. Our role is really in the background, and to make sure our goal is to make that response as seamless and efficient as possible. After disasters, we do a lot of work with recovery programs. We work with Cal OES, which is the State Office of Emergency Services, and FEMA, and they'll come in and assess damaged localities, whether it be public property like government entities that have damage, roadways that are destroyed, dams that might fail. And then separately, we also coordinate with both the state and the federal entities to come in and do what's called individual assistance, which is when there's damage to private property, homes and businesses. And we work and collaborate with the state and federal agencies to help mitigate and support residents after those type of emergencies. And then once the disaster's over, we work with public works and other entities to do mitigation to try and minimize impacts of future disasters, lessons learned on things. And so kind of the timely topic, talking about what we can do to mitigate and the prescribed burns and things like that are ideas of mitigation that will minimize the potential impact of future disasters. And then probably the thing we do the most is we support other op area jurisdictions, Contra Costa being the op area. We work with all 19 incorporated cities to help them be better prepared at the local level. So some of the programs specifically, we do emergency planning, and this is not only at the county level, but we support local cities with their emergency plans and again, help make sure that they're consistent with state and federal guidelines. We do have a lot of different projects that we do to assist us with that. And then we do a lot of training for our Emergency Operations Center team. We also provide training to the local jurisdiction cities as well for emergency operations training. This is specifically not necessarily fire or law enforcement local response. This is for the emergency management teams at the cities and the county level. We do a lot of training for that. We do community outreach. We go and do safety fairs and public speaking to organizations on preparedness and personal preparedness. And as I said, we spend a lot of time doing training leading up to disasters. Not so much in the last year. The op tempo in the last couple of years for us has been so busy with wildfire response, COVID-19 response that we've not been able to do as much training as exercise, because last year our EOC was activated for 9 of the 12 months, which has never happened before. And that was mainly for COVID and public safety power shutdowns in 2020 that kept us that busy. But in less busy times, we do a lot of exercises, tabletop exercises, drills. We did collaborate. Walnut Creek hosted an evacuation exercise a year or so ago, and we were involved not only with community warning system, but with some of our other resources to assist that. So we expect that those things are going to start to happen again now that the community is opening up and we're able to get together and do more in-person training. So we'll see that happening going forward. In August of 2020, we moved into a state-of-the-art emergency operations center. This facility was part of a much larger construction project in the county, but the county, the chief administrative officer, the CAO, and the sheriff and decision makers really made a priority and understanding that disasters are affecting our community more and more, and they provided the resources for us to build a facility that is world-class. And we've been doing a lot of work in the middle of our COVID response and our PSPS responses to have this facility up and running and people know how to work in that facility. The biggest feedback from the 2017 North Bay wildfires, after each event, local jurisdictions have to do what are called after-action reviews. The biggest area of improvement that Sonoma said that they needed was to have the ability to understand what we call situational awareness, what's happening directly on the ground, to be able to make quick decisions with limited resources, and specifically in that scenario, getting the information out and doing the evacuation calls to the right parts of the community. They were sort of in an information blackout and weren't able to make quick, concise decisions on what parts of their community they needed to evacuate. So situational awareness and what we call a common operating picture is sort of the theme of what an emergency operations center does. And so we spent a lot of time focusing training on our personnel on how to get that information. And then this facility is going to complement that with the ability to pull information from a lot of different sources, whether they're the PG&E and CAL FIRE wildfire cameras. We have GIS mapping that we can pull directly up, and we can collaborate and share all of this information, not only in this facility, but to other facilities. So locals will be able to see what we're seeing, and we'll be able to see what they can see, which then will allow us to be better at priority setting. And if we have to push that button to do an emergency evacuation, that we get it to the right parts of the community. So that's really what we have been focusing our emergency operations center evolution over the last couple of years is towards that. And I think we have a very good facility and a good team around that to be able to better respond going forward. We've had lots of experience over the last few years, and I think we're in a place now that is going to allow us to enhance our abilities to be much more reactive and ensure that the community responds to and recovers from these emergencies quickly. So that's it as far as what I have to say. I'm going to just hand it over to Heather, and then we can go to questions for both of us after that.
Hi, thanks, Rick. Yeah, like Rick mentioned, my name is Heather Tiernan. I manage the community warning system for the county. So the system that sends out the emergency alerts. I spoke briefly at the end of our last meeting, but I just like to be like a 4-year-old and just keep going and going and going until I get what I want, which is for everyone to register. So I'll just, make my appearance every single time until everyone is all ready for the next emergency. So just a quick overview about the system. So I think, we talked a little bit about sort of how we use our system. The main thing we just want people to know is that we only use this system for life-threatening emergencies where we need you to do something. So if it's going to be freezing tomorrow night, we can probably hear about that in the news, on our weather app, and all these places. So something like that, we're not going to necessarily use our system for, just to tell you that it's going to be cold. What we will use our system for is if there's a fire or a flood, or if there's bad air, and excuse me, we need everyone to stay inside. So if it's like a life or health threatening situation that's sort of coming through right now, we'll use our system to tell everybody about that. It's available 24/7. We work with the first responders throughout the county. So all of the fire agencies, all of the law enforcement agencies, public health agencies, anyone who is in charge of whatever today's emergency is, can work with us to send out an emergency alert. And we do a lot of collaboration and training with those people to make sure that they know, when to call us, the things that they need to tell us, the things they need to ask us, what we're going to ask them. That way, when there's an emergency, we're not really wasting time, trying to figure out what the heck we're all doing. We all know what we're doing, and we're just going to get an emergency alert out. And then I think just to quickly review all of the different ways that we can send emergency alerts, we've got a lot of different ways. So if you've got what I call an old school landline, so an AT&T landline that if the power goes out, it still works. Not a Comcast bundle, or not a bundle through something. It needs to be an old school AT&T landline. We already have that phone number, but everything else you need to register. So if you have like I mentioned, like a triple bundle or whatever that comes with the phone line or a cell phone, you need to register that phone number with us so that we can send you emergency phone calls when those happen. We can also, when you register, we can also send you messages, text messages and email messages. Emails aren't really going to wake you up in the night, but the thing that's nice about an email is that when you get your phone call and it's a robot voice and you hear it and you're scared because something bad is happening, you can just, open that email right up and it'll be there, and you can re-get any details that you missed or anything like that. So you can just go in there, and it gives you sort of another chance to really see like what we're telling people to do, which way we're telling you to go, which way we're telling you not to go, anything like that. We also have our own website. That's where you go to register to receive emergency alerts. It's also where you can go to see if there's any emergency alerts. So that's helpful if you think something's going on, but you're not sure. And then we use social media, which is great because it's one of the best ways that we communicate with the media. So when the news starts talking about an emergency alert that we've sent out, a lot of times they're going to get our information and our map and all of that from the website or from social media. We can also activate a bunch of other tools. So we can activate the emergency alert system. That's the loud, annoying one that stops your TV show or your radio show. And then we can activate wireless emergency alerts, which is, I like to call it the annoying cell phone one. It makes a really loud sound and it shows a really short message. And then usually like when you go to click on it, it kind of just disappears. So those are great because they don't require registration and they can make a pretty loud sound that can either wake you up or, get your attention or whatever. But they're not the best with this, like how much information they provide. And then finally, we can activate weather radios. It's not a regular radio. It's a special radio that's used for, weather. A lot of places like Hawaii, they're popular because you can like listen to the surf report, if people who live really close to the water, weather radios, or like if you live in where there's tornadoes, that's good because they'll send an alert if there's a tornado. So we don't have a lot of those around here, but you can get one for 20 bucks on Amazon. And it's great because if we think that we're having like a major communication problem, if we've got a big fire and cell phone towers are going down, or if just there's a public safety power shut off and the power's been out for too long and cell phone towers are starting to lose their power, we can send an alert that goes out to those radios, which is great because they're radios. So they don't really rely on a lot of the newer types of technology to send alerts. It's a pretty reliable type of technology that we can use. And in the worst of times, those are still expected to work. So we can use all of those different things. The thing that we tell people is you need to get connected to as many of those as possible, because we've seen, studies show that people don't respond after the first alert. They see something and then they either need to like call their neighbor, or they need to call their neighbor, look at like check the news to see if the news says to do that also. So if you're registered for a couple of our different types of alerts, first of all, you're going to get the most and the best information, but also you're going to get it a couple different ways. And hopefully it's going to like make you take action fast, because you don't want to be, late to evacuating if it's time to evacuate. So that's the tools that we can use. So it's kind of a quick overview, and then you can go to the next one, Rick. And so some of our, I guess, like frequently asked questions, especially when it's getting close to fire season, we have, we get these a lot. And so I like to kind of talk about each of these. The first one is how will you wake me up in the night? We get a lot of people who say, well, I turn my phone off at night, or I put my phone in the other room, or whatever, I put it on silent, I put it on do not disturb because I don't want to have all my emails waking me up, or my friends who text message late into the night. I don't like it, bothers me. So we say, well, usually I first start with get better friends, and then who don't text you in the middle of the night. But then I say, okay, that's fine. Let's leave your phone on, especially during fire season. And maybe you put it on do not disturb, but you can save our phone number as if you save our phone number as a contact, so as like community warning system, or like Heather's annoying me, or however you want to save it, right? You save it as emergency alert or something, and then you can put on there like emergency bypass. And I think we've sent the instructions. We can send them out again, or you can call us if you need any help. But you can do that, so that way, even if your phone's on do not disturb, our alerts will come through. We also recommend you do that for like family members and stuff like that, so in case they're having an emergency. But it's a really great way to sort of get your phone to not be bothering you, not be super connected to your phone, but still be able to get those emergency alerts. And just make sure it's not on silent, because if it's on silent, it's on silent and we can't really get through to you. So we do have ways we can get that we like a good compromise to be able to wake you up in the night without having your phone wake you up for every single little thing. The next question is, what if cell signals go down? So I talked about this a little bit already. We do have the ability to use the weather radios to send emergency alerts. Also, something that we've seen in the past couple big power shutoffs that we've had is that if a couple cell phone towers go around or go down in an area, you might not be able to make a phone call, but some of our emergency alerts were still able to get through. And I think it's just because there was enough signal for like that text message, something like a text message, a wireless emergency alert. It's a very small data message instead of like a phone call taking up a lot of the space. So we did see that there was success in that. And then finally, over the past couple of years, the cell service providers have had a lot of pressure to get their towers sort of hardened. So we have seen, some increase in capabilities there, and that it's going to take a longer time for them to just, lose service because of the power being out in the area. So hopefully that's not really going to be an issue. If it starts to be an issue, we're still seeing some of our alerts get through. But if it's all bad and everything is all gone, that's why we have weather radios. So we've got a lot of sort of contingencies for when signals start to get bad. And then sort of along those lines, what if the power is out? So if your power is out, a lot of times that means that your internet is going to be out. So if you have an internet phone, you need to just be careful that, that phone probably isn't going to work, but your cell phone will still work as long as as long as the battery is charged. So you're going to want to make sure that you keep your cell phone charged, have maybe a portable battery charger so you can keep things up as the power is out. Another thing that we recommend a lot is just to get sort of it's like a power source. It's like a big battery, like wait here, yeah, like this big, and you can plug that into the wall, and you can plug your internet router or your internet phone into that, so that when the power goes out, it turns into like a battery, and there might still be some stuff that works. You can use that to charge your cell phone. So it'll keep you up and running for a little while, but really just as time goes forward, most of the infrastructure is going into the cell stuff. So if you can get a cell phone, make sure you have a backup charger for it so that it can charge even if the power is out. Same thing with weather radios. A lot of them, they'll plug into the wall, but they also have a battery. So it'll just use the wall power. And then when the power goes out, it'll use the battery power. So there's some good options there to like keep you connected, even if there's no power. Okay, what if I see fire or smell smoke, but I haven't gotten an emergency alert? We always want to tell people to definitely use your gut, follow your gut. If you see something and you think you need to get out of there, don't wait for us. You know, we've seen in some of these emergencies that we've had is that things change very quickly, and we are really working on our communication as first responders and our ability to know what's going on more completely and sooner, to have like a good understanding of like the whole emergency as quickly as possible. But if there's ever going to be, and if there's ever something when you're like, this is bad, don't wait for us, go if you just need to. Yeah, we just don't want to tell people. I mean, we would just don't want people waiting if there's like fires happening everywhere and it's spreading fast and we, you know, haven't heard. We don't want to tell people don't do anything till you hear from us. And then finally, I get Nixle alerts from Walnut Creek or wherever. Lots of places have Nixle alerts. Is that enough? No, that is not the official emergency notification. A lot of cities have these, and you might get things like traffic, I guess, warnings that you know, like, oh, a traffic signal is down or there's an accident, so the road is closed. You know, those things are nice because no one wants to sit in Walnut Creek traffic all day, but that's not our emergency alert system. It's only for those major alerts. So you just want to make sure that you are registered with us. We have the most tools that we can use during an emergency. We have, again, all of those tools. We're the only place in the county that's going to be able to get to all of those real fast for you. So I don't discourage Nixle or any of these other alerting systems like WC Alert. Those are all good because it's just good to have good situational awareness, but you need to register with our system. Hopefully you register and you never ever hear from us because we don't have a major life-threatening emergency in your area. So yeah, hopefully you register and then that's it. That's it. You never hear. And then finally, what phone number will our calls come from? So this phone number on the screen right now, 925-655-0195, that's our caller ID. That's not our phone number. Don't call that phone number. It's just a nothing phone number. But that's where our phone calls will come from. So it's not going to be a spam. If we call you from that, since it's the county number, it might say Contra Costa County if you don't save it. It should not show up as spam, again, because it is registered with Contra Costa County. But it's nice to know. And if you do want to save that phone number in your phone, that's, instead of being a phone number, you can have it say emergency alert. And that way, you know, you don't have to think about who is this? What is this? You'll know that it's something reliable and something that you can trust. So, so yeah, like I said, it's not the phone number if you need to call us. If you need to call us, that's fine. We have another phone number for that one. You can find it on our website, but this is our caller ID phone number. Our text messages don't come from this number. Our text messages come from a short code that sometimes changes. It's just the way that text messages work in these sort of mass notification systems. So we can't tell you for sure what that phone number will be, but the phone call will come from this phone number. So I think that is pretty much it for me. Yeah, that's it for me. I guess we can move on to the next section, or if it's questions time.
Thanks, Rick, and thank you, Heather. I really appreciate it. Just one thing I do want to note, since it's fresh on everybody's mind, Heather talked about Nixle instead of Walnut Creek Nixle. So we have our own Rossmoor Nixle, and I encourage you to also sign up for Walnut Creek Nixle. We're separate entities, and a lot of times I'll grab what they put out and then I'll redistribute it. But just make sure there's no lag time and there's no delay. Make sure you sign up for the Walnut Creek one as well. Okay, before we get to questions, actually, I wanted to have Fire Marshal Chris Bachman talk about the fire that we had, the grass fire we had here in Rossmoor. I believe it's almost about 2 weeks old now. So Chris, please.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I'm going to share my screen. This was an overview of the fire that we had out at Rossmoor on the morning of June 19th. And I know that I've seen several emails. There's been a question of, what caused it. This is the second fire that we've had in this area. We are aware of that. I've reached out to PG&E and asked them specifically if we can get a report. They actually have a data response unit that they can evaluate their system to see if there is any unusual occurrences that were recorded that morning. Unfortunately, this takes several weeks to get a report back. I have put in that request for that and given them the date of the fire, which was August 24th, 2020, when a fire occurred in this same general vicinity in 2020. So the response I have back from PG&E right now is that on June 19, 2021 at 8:23 hours, PG&E's Rossmoor 1107 distribution circuit experienced a momentary outage affecting about 430 customers in the Rossmoor area. At 8:43 hours, a PG&E troubleman responded to the location of an apparent vegetation fire at the 1400 block of Rockledge Lane in Rossmoor and was unable to identify any sources of trouble that affected the PG&E's electrical system at this time. PG&E is in the process of investigating the source of the trouble in the circuit, does not currently know the cause of the momentary outage at this time. Although all these times are approximate, they are looking into the information and they are still in the process of conducting additional research and will reach out to me when they have a final determination. So I will pass that along to Tom when I get it, and hopefully we'll know the answer to that, not only this fire, but the one that occurred back on August 24th, and evaluating, do they have an anomaly that's occurring with their equipment since they've had 2 fires in this location within a year. And it burnt, maybe a little over an acre, probably not quite 2. If you'll notice, we did have our crew 12 on scene immediately, along with, let's see, we had 1 frontline engine there and 2 wildland apparatus. We canceled our dozer. It was en route. It was not needed. And we brought this under control in about 15 or 20 minutes. I think the important takeaway from this is it's very important to keep an eye out. When you see smoke and you confirm there's fire, please call 911 immediately, because this is a perfect example of when we get early notification of a fire that has occurred and throw a lot of resources at it really quick, we're able to contain this to less than 2 acres and brought this under control in 15 to 20 minutes. So really important to call us immediately when you do see a confirmed fire. Give us the best location that you can. I know a couple units, including myself, went to a different access point. Maybe it was one of the callers and we didn't have good access to this hill, where then the battalion chief got on the radio and said our best access is going to be at this point off of Rockledge. So we did have a little bit of conflicting information where half of us did go to the top side and we weren't able to access it. So we circled back around. So some of you may have saw the apparatus go by and circle back around. It was just from several callers calling in and we didn't have an exact location of where we could best access it, but still was able to get it under control in less than 20 minutes. As far as the questions, I noticed there were several on controlled burns, and I would like to share. So we've done one controlled burn this year, and it was out in the Phillips 66 area. We did it in collaboration with CAL FIRE and Phillips 66 fire crews that they have on site. And we used it as a training burn because we had our fire ops class, which for some of our personnel that are pursuing to become strike team leaders, they need this firing operations class. It's class 219 through the state. And in order to do that, you have to also have live fire training where we're putting live fire on the ground in a controlled atmosphere. So let me show you a quick video. This is just a quick video of the fire that we had where we did prescribed burning out at Phillips 66. This was just grasslands, as you can see, but to the left over on that road, that was a whole row of houses. So we did do that, we'll say close to a neighborhood. But I think the interesting thing, if we watch it one more time, is it does produce, even when this is just grasslands, a lot of smoke and heat, even in a prescribed burn where we were only doing, this was maybe 50 foot wide and then several hundred feet long. The other thing to note is this is very labor intensive. We had over 50 people at that controlled burn. We probably could have got by with maybe 30 or 35, but because a lot of them were also students that were learning the techniques of prescribed fire, that's why we had a few more. One thing also to note is even when our training burns, you do have to get permits from Bay Area Air Quality Management, and they have a lot of strict requirements on what they'll allow for burning. So if I know I saw the questions pop up of, can we do prescribed burns? Can we do burning at Rossmoor? One of the biggest hurdles you're going to have to overcome is following the guidelines of Bay Area Air Quality Management and getting the permits from them, because even as a fire department, we do a training burn, we still have to get permits from them for air quality. The other thing I think that's worth noting, we did this on June 3rd, and the fire behavior we saw on June 3rd was a lot more extreme than what we typically see in the beginning of June. I did find it interesting that when Dr. Wilkin showed her dates of the different burns that they had done, they were in May, and I think one of them was the beginning of June. That if you're going to do the burning, it typically would be best to do it in the May time frame. Although this year is definitely an anomaly because, we bumped back our deadlines for weed abatement to May, and usually they're in the middle of June. So this year we had a lot drier spring, and our conditions that we saw even when we were doing our burn on June 3rd are what we would typically see in the July timeframe. So it was quickly relevant that even based off the controlled burn to the number of fires we had in June, that the fire behavior we saw in June is what we're typically see in July and August.
All right, thanks, Chris. I appreciate the updates there. Carla, I believe it's time for our Q&A. Do you mind taking it from there and asking the questions?
Sure, I've been trying to. Thank you for everyone for asking questions. These are great, very detailed questions, which is always really helpful for all of us. Let's see here. So we'll start with some of the questions that were focused on Dr. Wilkin. She's still here. She is, okay. So one question was the graph you showed, it was the second graph in your presentation that showed the span of years of fire. And one question was, what happened to the forest fires between the years of 1800 and 1950? Very specific graph question there.
Hi. Yeah. So what happened to the forest fires between, what were the dates again?
1800 and 1950.
And so after the European influence, we started to see declines in Native American populations. And so in that time period between the Native American population decline and the influence of Europeans to when we started to have better record keeping, there is a gap on how many acres of fire occurred in California. There's a gap of knowledge there.
Interesting. We didn't have really good local governments like we have now that keep all the records.
Right, no GPS, not as many historians to walk the fire lines and record where the perimeters occurred.
Thank you. There are a number of questions, and I think, Chris, you answered these about are prescribed burns around Rossmoor recommended and air quality issues around that. I think you touched on those, but is there anything you would want to add about any plans prescribed burns around Rossmoor that may be coming up?
So we're going to use the Phillips 66 area as kind of a test force, although we mainly utilize that for training purposes. We did strategically pick that location because that large open field and grassland almost burns every single year because it's right along I-80. And there's, whether it's cigarette or chains sparking from a trailer or something going down the road, regularly there is always a ditch fire that starts right off I-80. It gets into that big open space and runs right up along those houses. And year after year, it's, anywhere from a, 5 to 10 acre up to maybe 20 acre fire that we deal with. So putting in that wide line between that open space and those homes, we feel we're better prepared this year if that does occur. And it provided us great training in a safe manner. So we're anxious to kind of watch and see, was that really beneficial? Did it have a big impact? Could that be done in other areas? We're open to it, but let's see how effective, we'll say, our first decent kind of prescribed area that we did, although mainly utilized as a training burn. Does it have an impact on our operations this year in a known area that we have fires repeatedly that put homes at risk from starting along Interstate I-80?
There's another question around prescribed fires. In your opinion, if there was more prescribed fires that were done or in the Sonoma Napa area, would that have prevented some of those fires that happened last year and previous years?
I really can't speak to that because I was not on those fires. We did have some strike teams that were up in those areas, and we did visit one of those areas in a configuration up around Lake Berryessa where there was a lot of homes, and they ended up losing some homes once it got up on the steep slope. And several of the chief officers all went up there and toured that area to kind of discuss the complexity of the incident and why the fire ran up the hill so quick and why so many structures were lost, to kind of learn from that. But as far as the big picture of could that have made a difference, I don't know. I don't know the area well enough to be able to speak to say would it have been. I know that one issue that did come out of that they talked about and why it spread so quick to Vacaville and Fairfield area, and they lost so many homes the next day, was in the middle of the night, they had another intentionally set fire that was unbeknownst to anybody until the next morning. And they couldn't figure out how it spread so quickly in a different direction. Well, it's because a second fire was intentionally set in the middle of the night from the first one that was burning on day 1 and day 2, and that had a major impact on why so many homes were then lost on day 3 in Fairfield and Vacaville.
Just to speak to that question, obviously, when we have lives lost in structures in a fire, it's because of a few reasons, right? So potentially homes that were built after the modern wildland urban interface building codes and people not understanding the latest scientific recommendations, but also in terms of prescribed fire, it would have reduced the overall fuel load in the system and also increased the heterogeneity. So you would have had more space between shrubs and trees and potentially less ladder fuels for the fire to go up into the trees. And so I have many colleagues now in Audubon Canyon Ranch's Fire Forward, and they are a nonprofit working within those fire footprints to actually continue to reduce the fuels to help prevent the severity and kind of the fire behavior that we saw during those fires. So I would say that a lot of people do think that prescribed fire would have influenced those fires, although it still would have been a quick wind-driven fire, but we may have seen some different effects in our natural areas.
Thank you both for that. We're going to zoom in a little bit on Rossmoor because there are some very specific Rossmoor questions. And we'll start with the first one about barbecues. Why do we allow barbecues inside Rossmoor if there's such an elevated fire risk?
I'll step in a little bit of what I know, and then Tim, feel free to add to it. Most, if not all, the mutuals do not allow any briquettes, those kind of charcoal barbecues. They only allow gas propane fed barbecues in Rossmoor or in the mutual properties. We do have one area that allows outdoor barbecuing that is part of the Golden Rain Foundation. However, we are currently studying whether or not we're going to allow charcoal barbecues in that area just because of the fire danger. So there'll be more information on that here shortly. Tim, is there anything else?
Yeah, I would add that the Golden Rain Foundation cannot restrict barbecues or anything like that. So GRF does not direct the mutuals. It works the other way around. So the mutuals make the rules, and if they allow barbecues, they allow barbecues, and it would be contrary to recommendations that we might have. There's nothing that we can do to restrict barbecues other than the mutual boards of directors making the decision themselves to either restrict it, limit it, or eliminate it.
Another fairly specific question about stoves. And the person asking the question is concerned about a fire that may have ignited because of their stove recently. And should that be a concern that residents have going forward, that their stoves could potentially cause fire?
Tom, you want to take that, or you want?
Actually, I was hoping Chris would, since they responded to the fire that they're
So I'm not familiar with the report, but if the report identified that the fire started in or around the stove, that is where our investigation would stop. Once we are able to determine that it was an accidental fire. And as far as what you're getting into now is really like a subrogation issue of, is there liability between maybe a certain type of stove manufacturer? Was there wiring work done previously? Is the wiring old? That's usually where the insurance company gets involved, and they'll bring out an electrical engineer and evaluate, is there anybody that they could then go after to recoup that claim? Probably the question is, how old is the stove? If you're talking about they're very old, or is it old wiring? Again, was there an electrical engineer brought in to evaluate the cause of the stove, if that's what started it? But unfortunately, once we determine that a fire is accidental, that's where our investigation stops, because we identify that it's an accidental fire. As far as diving deeper into that would sometimes be done by the insurance company with an electrical engineer. If it's something that you want us to forward Tom the investigation report, I know I forwarded him the incident report, which showed that they had a major incident back in, I believe it was the beginning of June. But at the time, the fire investigation report was not complete. But I can forward our investigation report to Tom, but I can tell you we wouldn't have really dove deep into the electrical cause if once it's determined that it's accidental.
Hey, Chris, maybe you can educate people on this, which is most fires, like in the kitchen, a stove or an oven, is not usually caused by a faulty stove, but is more caused by human error. Is that an accurate statement?
Yes, it is. It's more of an issue of human error associated with the stove. Now, I don't want to say that was the cause of this because I have not looked at the investigation report for this fire, but we can forward that fire investigation report to Tom, which would identify what the cause was. And if it was electrical, then, that's something that, Tom could evaluate to see if he'd want to examine it further.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And Chris, does the fire district do any proactive fire inspection for homeowners to check if there's potential need for vent cleaning or new wiring in the walls?
So we would do we have what we would call like home safety inspections, but no, it wouldn't get to the extent of evaluating your wiring system or opening walls and looking at that. It would look at your obvious signs of fire hazards that exist through a general inspection of walking through your home.
Thank you. And one very important question that we always get, that we always, all the agencies on this call like to answer, so that we're repeating this message over and over again, is around evacuation of Rossmoor and what is planned. How do folks get out? How would we go about doing that in the case of an emergency? So all of us like to chime in on this, but we'll start with Tom, and then we'll move to the police department, and then we'll talk to the fire district as well.
Okay. Yeah, this is one that always comes up. A lot of times it's brought up that there's really one entrance and one exit in Rossmoor, and how are we all going to get out of here? And as you know, I'm sure Lieutenant Mangini will bring up, as well as Marshal Bachman, the probability of us ever, or of the first responders requiring that everybody in Rossmoor evacuate at the same time is very low. It's extremely low. They have plans, and I'll let them talk about it. But I know what we've done here is part of our emergency operations plan that we created in 2020 is we created those zones so that it's very easy to know what zone you live in, so you know what zone you're in, but also for first responders to know what zones they're going to evacuate first, which will always be the closest to the threat, so that there's an orderly evacuation and a safe evacuation. And just, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, but you will be seeing more of this, coming out in the Rossmoor news. And it talks about what zone you're in and knowing your zone and how to properly evacuate and do it safely. But I want to encourage, though, as it was said earlier, if you feel fearful, go ahead and leave. There's nothing that you have to wait, like what Heather Tiernan said. You don't have to wait to be told to leave. If you feel fearful, please go ahead and leave beforehand. Lieutenant Mangini?
Yeah, I don't want to retread a lot of what was already said. I do want to add to that yes, there is one way in and out, but in terms of when we're talking about evacuating because of fire, it's an extremely defensible one way in and out. There are multiple lanes on both sides of the guard shack that can grant ingress, or in this case egress, for a great many people at once safely. Yes, you've got your zones, and please know what they are when that pamphlet comes out. When you do end up getting that, please know what they are and do your own pre-planning. It was your fire. I can't remember her name right now. She did a great presentation from the fire district about fire education, about have your route planned ahead of time, know where your emergency locations are that you're going to land, and rehearse that in your mind, and maybe even rehearse it practically and go to that person's house or whatever. That's what's really going to keep you the safest. But that one way in and out is very wide and very friendly to emergency responders, both getting equipment in and getting you out safely and efficiently. So that's all I've got to say about that.
And there was another question about, are we planning any evacuation drills? As we all know, as the Lieutenant Mangini said, practice makes perfect here. So making sure that you're personally prepared, but also for all these agencies on the call, practice for us also makes us better first responders at a time that we have to be really good. So there was a question about, are we going to be doing any evacuation drills in Rossmoor fairly soon? And the answer is, we were planning to do one on a small scale with one mutual, and then this thing called COVID happened in 2020, and we decided probably not the best thing to get a lot of people together in one spot and practice. So, but we are, as we are coming, we're coming out of COVID, we're seeing the light at the end of this COVID tunnel. We are planning something for potentially this fall to practice with, again, small scale before we grow an evacuation drill for the entire area. I will say that the city is leading along with every single person on this call. We have a monthly meeting to talk about Rossmoor emergency preparedness. It's something that the city takes very seriously and everybody on this call takes very seriously. So it is something that is top of mind for us and something that we are getting ready to do. Moving right along for other questions. Let's see, let's go to, there's a couple questions about what do we do with animals and pets when we're evacuating or during an emergency? And I know we have, Alana is on the call with us from Animal Control that can talk a little bit about this.
So the most ideal scenario is that your pet goes with you. This is going to be the least stressful for an animal and the most ideal for other agencies involved. If that means a dog, always make sure to have a leash and a collar ready and your dog accustomed to those. Cats, a carrier near the front of your door that you can put them in. I recommend with cats, especially practicing ahead of time. I think everybody who owns a cat knows you pull the carrier out, it runs away and you can't find it for 5 days. So if that means leaving your carrier out wide open and tossing good treats in there to get the cat comfortable to go in, that's the most ideal scenario. The animal will go with you. Most of the time when the Red Cross sets up shelters for evacuated people, they either allow animals or our volunteer team CART, Contra Costa County CART, will come up and set up a shelter on scene there to care for the animals right where the owners are. So that's our most ideal scenario, is that they go with you. It's also good to have a backup plan, whether it be a friend's house, a boarding facility, or a veterinarian that you know in case of an emergency you can take your animal to.
Awesome, thank you. There was another question about how do we plan for concurrent risks and disasters? So it's not, fires just don't happen in a vacuum. It's usually a major wind event. It's usually really hot. It's really smoky, and there's just a lot of extreme going on at once. And so there was a question about how do our police department, how does the fire district prepare for multiple things at once?
I can start with that. So when we have, I'll give an example. I believe the date was October 27th, 2019 was an occurrence where we had a major wind event. We had multiple fires going on throughout the county, and we evacuated several thousand residents in the Lafayette area. And it went very, very well that day for multiple reasons. One, it was a combination. We had a red flag event going on. It was a PSPS, so we had areas that were without power. We knew ahead of time it was coming. We upstaffed the county EOC. We had our local DOC staffed as well. We had additional resources on staff. All chief officers were called back in. And from the county level of running the EOC, CWS was there. I was in the EOC when they were evacuating those areas. And it's because we planned for a disaster happening that day based on weather predictions and a call of red flag warnings, and we knew the PSPS was happening. So all agencies were kind of on high alert, and the residents were ready to evacuate. We'd been pushing that message out that in the event of fires occurring, be ready to evacuate your home. And from whether it was from the officers that were on the street that were doing the evacuations to the firefighters that were responding in, all of them said it was in a very orderly fashion. It went very well. There were not any issues, and we brought those fires under control within about an hour. But as a precautionary, we did evacuate several thousand residents. And it's kind of the comment of what do you do to prepare? It was additional staffing levels were increased, and emergency operations centers were stood up to handle all those additional resources that were added to our system, both in the area and throughout the county.
Yeah, I think Marsh Bachman hit that perfectly. I think the other point to make on that is the preparation, in that I had mentioned in my part, we do a lot of collaborative training exercise. So we know who the right players are ahead of time. So we manage a monthly multi-agency coordination meeting that had sort of, because of our experience over the last couple of years, we know we need to get together more regularly with our planning partners. So we know how to get the right people into the right places. So yeah, there was pre-planning that was done. The fire pre-planning on upstaffing was incredibly helpful to mitigate that. But again, it's also then our continuous capability of working together. We now have concurrent events as the norm. This was something we never talked about 3 or 4 years ago. So that was October 2019, and then we come to October 2020, and we had a PSPS event in the middle of a COVID response. So I think I think we're getting better at it because of experience as well as preparation. It just is the new norm.
Thank you for that. And the county does really help us all kind of stay connected, and those agency calls are super helpful. So thank you, Rick, for adding there. Tom, I'm going to throw back to you. We've kept these folks here. We still have 130 people here, so they are dedicated, but wanted to do a time check with you.
Yeah, no, we're doing good. I do want to give EPO President Fran Gibson a moment to speak to everybody.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you for all our panelists today. You've done a wonderful job educating our senior community here in Rossmoor, and we're very grateful for that. I do want to repeat some things that were said today. I want to agree with Heather's wonderful statement about it's good to repeat, repeat, repeat. Repetition is the mother of all emergency preparedness messaging, after all. So residents who are here listening today, please, in the spirit of ready, set, go, please have a grab and go bag ready for every member in your household, including your pets. If you want to know what needs to go into that, it's a 3-day supply of food, water, medications, and personal supplies should you voluntarily evacuate from Rossmoor, or if our civil authorities seated here should call a mandated order for us to evacuate. So that list of things, if you go to rossmoorepo.org and go to the starred section, Residents Resources, you'll find a list of items to consider putting in your grab and go bag. I think it's very important in both the fire season we're in and the heat season we're now in. We're sort of a double jeopardy here, that you have a grab and go bag ready for every member of your household and have it close to the front door. We may have 15 minutes like I had in the Oakland firestorm. I had 15 minutes to get out. So we want you to make an evacuation plan with at least 2 destinations, please, should one of those be blocked by the event or the incident. And in that regard, get yourself a paper map for your car and store it in your car. GPS will give you a pinpoint, but it won't give you the area if you need to go around because of the incident or wildfire is larger than you thought it was going to be as you were headed toward your destination. What I've done in my case is I have friends in this area and we've just exchanged. They can come here if they're threatened. I can go there if I'm threatened. So have a destination plan with at least 2 destinations, and you've talked with your family and your support system, and you know where you're going and how you're going to get there. Do sign up for Rossmoor Nixle and sign up for Heather's amazing, wonderful service. We have a tip sheet on our website that takes the information that Heather has given, and she's vetted it for me. And it is there. It'll tell you exactly how to sign up for that system and how to bypass so that you can get those alerts at night. And I think, this is fire season. Please keep your car at least half full of gas, if not 3/4. You have an electric vehicle or a hybrid, keep it fully charged. And on red flag days particularly, pay careful attention that you have enough gasoline in that tank to get out of here safely. So Rossmoor EPO, if you have any concerns or questions, please go to our website. My email and phone number are at the bottom of the homepage. I'm delighted to help you with any information that you might need. And I want to take this opportunity to give a shout out to all our 400 members across 1,800 acres of Rossmoor who help their neighbors get ready for a disaster and emergency here in Rossmoor. We couldn't do the work we do without these marvelous volunteers. Thank you. And thank you, Tom, for the invitation to be here.
Thank you, Fran, for those extra tips and everything that you do for our community. It truly is huge. And I was glad to see the city of Walnut Creek recognized you recently with an award. So kudos to you and everything that you continue to do for our fantastic community. In closing, I want to thank Dr. Wilkin, Rick, and Heather for their presentations. Those were very helpful. I know I learned a lot, and I hope everybody else did as well. I want to thank our fantastic panel again for their ongoing efforts to make Rossmoor even safer. And as Carla pointed out, we meet monthly. Everybody you see on this page, we meet monthly, and we discuss how to make Rossmoor safer. So thanks again for everybody's commitment on that. And then lastly, I want you to remind everybody, keep your eye out for the next, in the next Rossmoor news, week or two, for the Rossmoor Wildfire Safety Card that will be an insert in the Rossmoor news. I want to let everyone know Rossmoor is a safe community, and we will continue to make it even safer. You will continue to see more community presentations, articles in the Rossmoor news, and other educational and preparation regarding wildfires in the coming days, weeks, and months. So thank you again, everybody, for being here, and please be safe. Bye-bye.